We are now live. So I am joined by Aaron Turner. So apologies that we are not on Webinar Jam as we normally are, but we had a few technical gremlins. But where there's a will, there's a way, and so we're now switching over to Facebook Live, and hopefully everyone can join us who was going to join us anyway, and those that can't, well, you can catch the replay of this. So welcome, Aaron. I'm just got Facebook loaded up in the background, so hopefully if anyone's online and they're watching us and you write any comments, I'll be able to see it and I'll relay it back to Aaron. But what we were thinking of doing is just having a bit of a chat around the issue of grounding, and grounding in terms of coaching specifically from a three principles point of view. And it feels like ages ago, Aaron, but you and I had a conversation months ago. I think it was at the end of February, because I was looking back at my messages, and back then we were talking about coaching and the role of grounding and what it means, and we had slightly different views. But it was a really helpful conversation, and that's kind of stayed with me, and my thoughts have changed on the certain things.
Cool.
But it's always great to talk to you. You and I kind of exchange messages here and there, and it's always really helpful. And I thought it'd be really good for people to kind of listen in to a conversation, to you and I talking, and so that's why we had this plan, this idea to do this several months ago, and here we are today with us both kind of sweltering in the heat, as I can see. So
yeah. Well, I was really keen to have this conversation, Ankush, because ground. When I was kind of interning and learning and kind of trying to see how the principles worked as a way of helping people and as a way of kind of as a foundation for your life and running a business, it always kept coming back to grounding, meaning the degree to which you see the principles as a description of reality and the degree to which you operate according to that assumption. And what was fascinating to me along the way is when I would get stuck or want to achieve something, in a way, grounding was always the last place I looked. I looked towards techniques and knowledge and theories, and going back to grounding and seeing, well, that's where the power is, has been endlessly helpful. But I can see as I train and coach and mentor and work with other practitioners that just like me, it's often the last place you look. If the principles are true, it should be the first place you look. So if you want to understand what's going on, you should go to the principles that are determining it. So I really enjoyed our conversation, and I realized, over the years you learn things and you take them for granted, and it's good to kind of talk them through. And so I thought it was a conversation worth bringing other people in on.
So I'm just going to kind of rewind you a second, and apologies if I seem a little distracted. I'm trying to manage people who are trying to message me to get onto this, but I think they're okay.
Yeah, there you go. That should sort it now.
But I was going to say, can we just rewind a second a little bit, because I think what's really important is what you mean by grounding, and I know you talked about it, but I think people can miss that. So
yes, I agree.
And for me, since we last spoke, that's kind of been, I guess, what I thought grounding meant, and I think what I think now is shifted a little bit. So could we hear a little bit from your point of view again, and in a little bit more detail? What do you actually mean by grounding?
Well, so what I think grounding means, grounding is your understanding of reality. It's the assumptions and understandings according to which you operate. Now, what the principles brings is a new, more fundamental understanding of reality. So the more you understand the principles, it can become your grounding. So your understanding of reality can be, reality is the principles in action. And for everyone who's seen some benefit out of that, to some degree, their understanding of reality is principle-based or principle-related. But we're all on a learning curve, so none of us. So your understanding, as far as I know, is completely can be. Oh, reality is so in action. And for everyone who's seen some benefit out of that, to some degree, their understanding of reality is and function in reality and the principles.
So yeah, so okay,
Yeah.
well, let's get into it. So what I heard you say was, grounding is all about reality and how reality works.
How you think it works, how the way that you live as if it works.
Right. And so that plays out, and you're giving the example of relationships. So if you're in a relationship with me, and then I think you started to cut out.
Yes. Yes, so when I learned the principles, my grounding in relationships was the first thing to change, because I realized that I wasn't experiencing my circumstances, I was experiencing my own mind. So my grounding used to be, my understanding of reality was, if I felt bad, something was wrong in my life. Whereas once I understood the principles, I realized that when I feel bad, it doesn't tell me anything about my life. It tells me about my state of consciousness, my level of clarity. And so my grounding and my understanding of what was happening in my relationships changed completely. So when I felt bad, instead of seeing it as useful information as to what needed correcting, it changed to useful information about not really taking yourself seriously and maybe letting yourself calm down until your head was on straight. And that's a completely different understanding, a different grounding, a different approach to exactly the same data, you could say.
Yeah. So I hear you with that, and like I said, my mind has changed a little bit around this, but where I was a few months ago, we were talking was, and I'll kind of play devil's advocate a little bit here, but so when we look at this with regards to coaching and specifically with regards to people taking this understanding out now, and my group's got kind of like 500 and so coaches who the vast majority of them are trained in the three principles, and some of them are coaches who are not, but then are looking to get a deeper understanding of the principles, right? But let's say the vast majority of them have had some training in the three principles. They are impacted by it to a certain degree.
Yes.
They would love to now take this out to the world, right? Whatever that means, and different people want to take it to different areas. And what I find is that people really struggle with that.
Yes.
And so, what I had heard you say previously was, well, that's a grounding issue.
Yes, that's right.
And for me, it looked like there was something more to it than that, because I saw, and I think you see this too. So I think this is going to be an interesting conversation.
Yes.
You and I both see people who come to all of the conferences, to go they kind of do the circuit, right, of all the training programs.
Yes.
And they're saying that they really want to help people and take this out in the world, and you see them, 2, 3, 4, 5 years later, and they're not really doing anything on a professional level. And when I speak to some of these people, to them it seems they can get disheartened, and they say, well, I really want to do this, and they struggle. And I just wondered, let's start off with what your thoughts are on that.
Well, the thing is, Ankush, I know that's a grounding issue. I know that is, because the thing that people don't realize is one of the problems with the current free principle coaching profession is it's not fully realized that the principles is not just new content. It's a completely different foundation. So the position that you expressed assumes that it's content. Look, I got an understanding, I got the content. Why can't I get the practice to work? Why can't I help people? Why aren't I confident? Why aren't I impactful? And what I learned from the principles is the key factor is levels of understanding. That's what grounding is. There are levels of understanding, and they're endless, right? So stop me if I go on too long, because that could happen. But when I got a personal understanding, it affected me deeply. My life was not the same. I didn't live it the same. Nothing in it was the same. I wasn't the same. I used to be socially anxious, self-conscious. Are you there?
I'm here. I'm listening.
Okay.
Intently.
Great. No, I didn't know if I'd lost you. And I was literally unrecognizable the way I went about life. My career took off, my relationships took off. It impacted me deeply. And at some point, like many of the people that are listening, I wanted to help others. And I didn't know, I couldn't really see how, right? Now, when I went to George, who's my uncle luckily, and said, would you train me? What he said, which has rung true ever since, is, I can't teach you how to do it. There's no such thing. You need a different level of understanding, right? And I'm going to give you an example, or as many examples as you want. Because at a different level of understanding, two things happen. You see things more fundamentally, so you get less lost in thought and distraction. And what that means is you feel totally different. And what that means is you live with a more expanded relationship to mind. And what that means is more of the inbuilt power, intelligence, energy, potential of life operates through you, right? So we see this, I know you know this, in our clients. I work with a business, the same business, with the same people, with the same processes, with the same budget, with the same assets, with the same strategy, with the same working hours, has doubled, has increased, wild increases in turnover that they didn't think was possible, over 100% increases in profit, increases of returns per salesperson. And if you understand the principles, you realize, our life is a measure of the degree to which the potential of mind comes through. It's not a technical issue. And every field's like this. Like, you can look at sports. The same athlete with the same fitness, with the same experience, can do really badly or completely unbelievably well. That's the power of the potential of the mind as it comes through thought and consciousness. Now, a principle-based grounding sees, that's what makes the difference. Now, just to give you a technical example, the more I've realized this, and the more I've realized that very few people are trained this way. Most people are trained, here's the understanding of the principles, here's a good business model, right? Now, according to the principles, with the real grounding of the principles, it's like you want to have an open mind to be inspired by the business model that comes from a wider intelligence to you. Taking someone else's business model makes no sense, right? Because you're starting in the form, you're not starting in the power of the mind, right? So I've always, from the very start of the Institute till the new Foundations program now, in which I've really honed it, I'm showing people that you look to your grounding, you go deeper, you get more mental horsepower, you see what to do more clearly, you have more impact. And where I saw this the most, because you know how people get stuck in their practices, they don't know what to do. So I have two practitioner programs, one for practitioners that are seeing clients, and one for those that want to know how to share with clients. Now all we concentrate is understanding. So in the practitioner one, we look at client work, not how to do client work, but what's the understanding that empowers a deeper client work. And we use case studies, they watch me working with people. And what's happened is every single one of those people, and some profoundly, so one of the people was struggling to see how to have a principle-based business, has been through all sorts of training, is in the top 3 self-help podcasts now on Apple. And that's purely because their grounding, their understanding got so simple and they got so in touch with it that what looked impossible, like how do I marry my business savvy with my principles understanding, became effortless and leveraged and impactful. That's how it works, right? On the beginning practitioners, I had a call with one of our foundation students, and it was so interesting. Here's what she said, and hopefully it will resonate with people on your call. She said, I really was impacted by the principles. I'm already a coach. I work in companies. I wanted to know how to talk about it to help people, but I couldn't see how. Now that we're doing the program, I see it deeper. So instead of sitting there not seeing where the principles fit in and thinking, how do I talk about it? How do I segue into the principles here? I see it everywhere. I didn't have the understanding to see it everywhere before, but I knew intellectually it was relevant. Now, because my understanding's deepened, I see it everywhere. And because I see it, I have to talk about it. So I don't need to know what to talk about. I don't need to know how to talk about it. I'm just talking about it. And as I'm talking about it, because I can't help it because it's in front of my face, I'm getting better at talking about it. She doesn't even need the help. See, so what most people don't understand, which I'm hoping this conversation does, is if you look to deepen your understanding at some critical mass of deepening your understanding, you will see it deeper, clearer, more fundamental, more compelling, and you won't be able to help but have an impactful business about it, right? So I don't know if that answers your question without going on too long.
No, that's really helpful, Aaron. And I want to come back again. I want to play devil's advocate with this.
Yeah, of course.
Just
everybody's thinking it, right?
Yeah, because to get that over, and I think this is where I was coming from when you and I spoke last time, which was, I guess my question then went, if it's all about grounding, and it makes sense what you said, if it's all about grounding, then what can people do to kind of facilitate that transformation?
Great question.
Because what and here's the bit that
awesome.
I want to add is because and maybe I'm in a little bit of a fortunate position because I have this audience to talk to coaches or 3P coaches, but I'm not selling a big year-long transformation program, right? And quite often what I hear from people who've done all sorts of programs, so I'm not picking on any particular one, is that people have spent an awful lot of money, and I guess it's relative, right? But people spend an awful lot of money.
I'm with you.
And
I agree.
And an awful lot of time. Yes. And they've been around, whatever, and they attend the conferences and they attend the retreats and they attend everything.
Yes.
So in their mind, they're doing kind of in line with what I'm assuming what you're saying, right? So like, okay, Aaron, it's all about grounding. I need to get to a critical mass. They then do all of these programs, and then they're still struggling. So how would you talk to that?
I love that question, and it's so true. So, see, I think the power of this conversation, and I hope people can hear me here, the idea is that you know that grounding is the point. Right, so I'm going to say two things, all right? The first one is, a lot of people that I've worked with, they're not thinking about their grounding. No, and I don't mean thinking about your grounding, forgive me. I mean, they don't see grounding as the thing, and they don't see that, so they're thinking about how am I going to manifest clients, and how am I going to this, and how am I going to that, and what about the money, and what about this, and what about that, and when's it going to happen, and how about now, and is it happening now, and what's wrong with me that it's not happening, and all of that, right? So my experience is, one of the benefits of knowing that it's grounding is to point to all those things that I just mentioned, anything other than what are the facts of the principles and what are their implications for me and what I'm doing. Not how am I doing, how am I doing now, what are the facts of the principles and what are their implications for what I'm doing, right? And I'll give you an example. When I first came to London, I saw that there was leverage in marketing. And I got really obsessed with marketing. Unbeknownst to me, I was basically just worrying about it. And I couldn't understand why I wasn't making any leverage until I thought, well, what are the principles and what are the implications for me? And I thought, okay, well, your level of clarity, your relationship to the potential of the mind is everything. What is that? Well, you're anxious. Is that good? And it was like, no, that's not good. So if you're anxious, whatever you're thinking about, you're making a hash of it. So let's just start there. And then I realized, marketing might be important, but not in this state of mind. So that reset me and gave me perspective. And from being reacquainted with my own grounding and my own basically seeing where my head was at, I saw when I knew what I was thinking about and when I didn't. And then everything started rolling again. So that's just a little example. So firstly, I think what people are thinking about things that don't matter, that have nothing to do with grounding, and are symptoms of the fact that we get lost in thought. Right? And there's a feeling to it: insecurity, desperation, impatience, greed. They're all symptoms. Desire, right? Anything other than ease, well-being, clarity, perspective, those things that everybody loves about the understanding. So that's one. Secondly, it doesn't matter what your grounding is. It matters that you're open and interested in a further appreciation. And I don't mean the way people study and get insecure about what they understand and what they don't. I mean they kind of get in a feeling of understanding. They're interested, right? So I made more progress being interested in the principles than I ever did trying to achieve something. So the goal of our programs, and not everybody gets what they need out of them for sure, is that people see what grounding is and that is the thing they need. And I think there are lots of people that train people that don't really appreciate that. So that's not really solely what they're up to. They're up to that plus. And as you and I talked about, as soon as you have that plus, you've lost your grounding, because either the principles are the sole description of reality, or they are, and then there's this extra bit, and that's where you get into trouble. You get fourth principle, the fifth principle, the 6.5 paragraph subsection B amendment principle. And so that's the second part. So for people on this call, just consider you have everything you need, and just an appreciation of what do the principles show us about our ability to benefit from having the things that we need, and stay out of the machinations of our own thinking. And we get into the machinations of our own thinking for all the right reasons. I want to help people, I want a better business, I want to see clients, right? But come back to the basics, and as soon as you come back to the principles, you will learn. If you're looking away from the principles, you won't learn, because you're looking in the wrong direction. So I'm not saying people need to get more training. I'm saying they need to really fully appreciate the power of their understanding, get the most out of it, and become a student of that as a way to get more horsepower. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, and by the way, if we've got questions, I'm doing my best to play devil's advocate, but really, I think the most helpful thing we can do, both Aaron and I, is if we've got people who really, if you've got a strong opinion, you're like, well, Ankush, well, Aaron, no, because X, please do. Yes. I don't want this to be kind of leading.
I agree with you, Ankush. I'd love to have people, because people ask questions. I really would. And nobody needs any training, because you can learn about this without, right? So that's one. And the other thing I wanted to say, you pointed to it. Oh yeah. So sometimes when I talk to people about this, they say, well, it's all right for you, Aaron, you blah, 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 you this, you that. But I swear to God, I swear on my life, that the only thing that's ever helped me with what I'm able to do, the impact, the business, everything, is looking towards the fact of the principles as a guide to what's going on and how to relate to it. And I've had times in my working life where I've been tempted to look elsewhere. Like you get insecure about your qualifications. You say, well, no, but what really matters is your understanding. And why would you be insecure about qualifications? Surely it's your relationship to potential of mind. Just keep going back to the same thing. I promise that's all I've ever done over the last 20 odd years, and professionally over the last 17, 18. And the reason because people don't see how powerful our understanding of the principles is, how much it gives us. So they almost feel like you remember Dora the Explorer? She had everything in her backpack. She'd go anywhere just with that one little backpack. Well, that's the principles. And it's hard to appreciate because we get insecure or impatient and we want to look elsewhere. But I've never gotten any benefit from doing that.
So again, I'm going to keep playing because I'm enjoying this myself.
I want you to.
So what is the role? So I'll give you an example of some things that have helped me, right? And there are different views of this of people out there amongst practitioners, right? So one thing that I found really helpful was Mark Howard, right? So Mark Howard obviously had seen many people over many years and explained the principles to them.
Yes.
And he said a couple of things once on a recording that I listened to, and I kind of interviewed him for this group, where he said, things like, he found that if you're trying to explain the principles, to someone, and it's kind of like hold still while I principle you type thing, right?
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
It doesn't work. And what he found was really helpful was that getting into that rapport, getting into that nice feeling first
Yes.
was kind of like a
Yes.
prerequisite in order to share.
Yes. Yes.
Now, I spoke to someone else who shall remain nameless, who said, well, he's talking about technique, right? And if you point to principles, then the feeling of rapport comes naturally.
Yes.
And so where I'm sitting kind of in the middle is, I can see that's true, and also I find it helpful to hear people like Mark talk about their experiences, because it can just like pop something in my head going, oh yeah, that's what I'm doing. That's where I'm focusing on something, as opposed to, well, being in touch with what the principles point to.
Yes. Well, the thing is, Ankush, and this is a beautiful question, because it's all about the level at which you look at it, not what you're looking at, right? So everything, if the principles are true, everything is a manifestation of the principles. And if you see the principles in it, you can get a better understanding from anything, right? But you have to see the principles in it to deepen your grounding in the principles, right? And if you see the behavior, that's non-transferable. The behavior is non-transferable. You can't copy someone's behavior and have it play out, because it was empowered by the where they were coming from, their clarity of mind, the level of mental potential versus mental distortion, right? So in what Mark Howard said, there is an understanding behind it, and it illustrates the principles. So if you want to, and we all get that feeling, hold still while I jimmy the principles into you, right? That is not a state of a deeper mind. There's an intensity, there's an agenda, there's a judgment. There are all feelings that tell you you're not in a grounded state. You're not in a state in which you really feel the principles from a hole in the ground, right? So you can look at it at grounding level. And that's what's happened to me, is I can see when my mind is free enough to connect and listen and talk with somebody about anything, including the principles, or when I'm not listening, I've got an agenda. That's my understanding that tells me that. And Mark's just giving an example of that, right? Now, you can understand that and say, oh, rapport and listening, that's the ticket. But it's a much more enabling thing to see, oh, that's another example of how you're living the limits of your relationship to mind, thought, and consciousness in every moment. And a more superficial thing is, don't get too intense with people, try to have rapport. And see, they're levels of understanding of the same thing.
Yeah, and I like that. And what I was thinking of when I heard you talk is, there were a lot of times in my business when I've done things very intuitively, and then I've seen online people copy it, and it just not land.
Yeah, it doesn't work. Doesn't work. Exactly. And you think of how many people are copying someone else's ideas to have a successful business. And what the principle says is, it wasn't the idea, it was where it came from for that person at that time. It was their relationship to a formless intelligence, and they benefited from that. And if you understand the principles, the idea of copying becomes silly, because it's like, well, I'm directly connected to the mains. Why would I copy? What would the point be of copying? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. So we've got a question from Arthur, so I want to make sure we get to some of these questions. And Arthur said, action. Once I was in so good a feeling, I didn't take any action. The other day I spoke to a guy that said it was the fourth principle. Just wanted Aaron's thoughts on that.
Well, the thing is, in Aaron Turner's grounding, and I take full accountability for this, the deeper your level of clarity of mind, or the less restricted your ability to appreciate the intelligence of the mind, right? So, and that comes with a really good feeling, the better off you are, right? Now, what's interesting about it is it follows a more impersonal agenda, right? So let's say I'm working up a storm and I'm trying to make something happen, and I'm like, you know what? I must be in too much of a small-minded state. I'm working twice as hard and I'm gaining no ground. It's like going down the motorway in first gear. Feels like we should be going fast, but the miles just aren't clocking down. And I settle down. what's interesting about it is because the principles point to the fact that there's a universal mind, I get what I need as a next step. And it might be I sack out for 3 weeks. Like, I'm using an exaggeration, but I sack out for 3 weeks and I can't get up, and I'm wondering, God, what's up with me? I can't live like this. I just don't have the savings for it. I'm going to get really obese, right? But that's my insecurity projecting. My grounding is a clear mind is more powerful, informative, and leveraged than Aaron Turner's made up, whatever you want to call it, right? Well, what will happen is you'll get recharged, and as you get recharged, your mind starts to expand, and as soon as you've got clarity and energy, you'll start to get thoughts that have inspiration and motivation. But you won't get it until you're ready, see? And then you'll get that, and then you'll see. So the principles basically put on the table, there is the fundamental, unrestricted, universal intelligence of life streaming through your head. You know it when you feel it. It's up to you whether you want to follow it or kind of just make the best use of your own little thinking, right? But the problem we have is that we judge it. Oh, I'm procrastinating. Oh, I'm never going to get there. Oh, well, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do that. But I swear to God, you follow the breadcrumbs of a clear mind. It's amazing where it leads you. Just it's one foot in front of the other, and all of a sudden you're like I don't feel like my business changes. But I look back year to year, I'm doing something completely different. My calendar is completely different every single year. And that's happening. Like, I'm doing what makes sense. And to the best of my ability, I'm seeing that I don't make sense when I'm all in a tiz, or I'm insecure, or I'm desperate, or that kind of thing. And that's to the degree I follow that better and better each year, because my grounding's improving, because I'm learning from the observations of my past. So I think we get insecure. If your mind's clear and you're comfortable not listening to your uncomfortable thought, whether it's insecure, impatient, desperate, judgy, critical. The critical ones, coaches are really good at. The judgy, critical ones. Then you'll find that your mind will lead you in a useful direction that you couldn't have figured out on your own.
It's interesting as I'm listening to you talk, Aaron, that in conversations with coaches. And I find it I find it funny, ironic, cosmic humor, maybe we should say, with three principles coaches, is that when you really examine kind of what's not happening in their business, and I love getting into detail, maybe it's just my style.
Yeah, it's cool. It's all in everything, so detail's good.
What I find is it comes back to what you're saying, right? So like you say, it's right. The next step.
That's right.
Why aren't you taking that step? If you look behind it, it's always... a version of, it's some kind of misunderstanding. Well, that's going to make me uncomfortable. If this doesn't work out, it would mean X, Y, Z.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. If a more open state has a feeling of energy and ease and engagement and inspiration, and you get more useful, inspired, insightful thoughts, then it doesn't make sense to work out of any other state. So I find a lot of people are trying to build a practice in a state of mind that has no energy, and then are wondering, well, why aren't I getting very far? And it's like, well, you're not firing on all cylinders. So if life is the potential of mind showing up through people, then the more powerfully it does that, the more powerfully they are enabled in whatever they do, whether it be sports or coaching or corporations or whatever. And if you're working from the principles, if you're principle based, then your primary interest would be the quality of the ease of the inspiration of the state of mind you're able to work from. And if you're not in a clearer, more inspired state, then there shouldn't be any questions about why things aren't working so well for you. That should be obvious. That would be a principle-based diagnosis.
Interesting. We had a question before we got cut off, and I want to make sure I kind of answer these. We'll get to them. And I think it was Michael, and I can't see the question now, but he was asking something along the lines of, do you think everyone who's grounded in the principles is primed, I think he said, or prone for being a professional coach?
I think so. So let me recap. There are levels of understanding of the principles. You're primed to the degree of your level of understanding. If you don't know your level of understanding, you'll see it in terms of the momentum and the impact you get when you work with people, and the degree to which that rolls into referrals and momentum in your work. It's all a symptom of the potential of mind coming through you at whatever level of understanding you are. And what your level of understanding does for you is it simplifies your experience into just more thought and kind of the irrelevance of thought. So your mental life gets simpler and deeper and more leveraged, and your distraction and preoccupation with irrelevant thought gets less. That's levels of understanding. You are primed to the level of your understanding, and as that deepens, you become not only primed but unstoppable. So there are practitioners I know that wherever they go, momentum and practice and communities cluster around them. Not because they have marketing technique, because there are people that do that. There are people that don't quite have that grounding, but because they work the marketing angle, they kind of, they can generate more momentum for their level of understanding. And I've got nothing against that. Just that's not what I'm talking about. So you're primed to the level of your understanding, and as that deepens, which it inevitably does if that's what you're looking towards, if everything's grist for the mill of your learning, that's just going to increase and increase and increase and increase. I think the problem comes when people don't quite have the level of understanding they need for the kind of practice they want, and they don't look towards their grounding as a way of getting there, and they try to fill that gap, and then they get frustrated and doubtful and etc. etc.
Aaron, one of the insights that I had, and this is maybe useful for us to discuss it. This is my learning live on air, right, in front of the whole group. So this isn't quite right, but what I saw, an insight I had since we last spoke, was how business building, as I've learned it in terms of coaching, and the principles is the same. And I'll be interested to hear your view on it.
I'm fascinated by that.
So what I heard from, so my coach is a guy called Steve Chandler, and what I heard from Steve and some of the coaches, who I really resonate with, who don't do a real hard marketing thing in terms of growing their business, was service is the way to grow your business and make money. So the more you serve, the more value you create for people, and the more value you create for people, the more money you'll make. And that really made sense to me as a kind of equation in my head.
Yeah.
And then what I all of a sudden saw was, the deeper that I understand the principles, the more that I love, in terms of just put love out into the world. That's what flows from the principles. And the more that I love, naturally, the more in service that I am. And all of a sudden I saw these two seemingly separate things, like, oh, it's the same. Principles to love, to service, to value, to wealth.
Yeah, that's cool. And did I lose you, Ankush?
No. So I'm kind of wondering what's your view on that, and is that is how you see it too?
No, it is. See, I think that the things that work coincide with an understanding of the principles. They work because they're in line with the way life works, which is what the principles describe. And things that don't work are not in line with the way that life works, the way the principles work. And things that work sometimes work depending on whether the person using them is coming from a ground is in line with the way the principles work. And what's cool about your insight, which I love, and this illustrates what I was talking about before, is as you look to the principles as a complete understanding of life, you start to see how the things that you did or understood or that worked and didn't work actually illustrates the principles running through the things that we do. See? So you have something that you did that worked, that you intuitively understood, and then you saw the principles working through them, and that deepened both your understanding of the thing and the principles, and that's a grounding shift. That's cool. It's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think we spoke about this too. How for me it was a really interesting journey, and this is why I love the conversation we had last time, which was my misunderstanding. I'd like to say is that when I used to hear people say it's a grounding issue, so one of the first people that I heard say this was Michael Neal, right? And I heard him talk about grounding, and I was like, well, no, it's not the grounding, because when I heard grounding, it was like you've got to go and read a Sid book, or you've got to sit in some more training. And the shift that I saw was actually when I went out into the world, and I'm hearing this from you today. When I went out into the world, and I for me, the profession I wanted to follow was coaching. When I went and did that was an opportunity to deepen my understanding of how the world works.
Exactly.
And that coincides for me with what kind of Sid was banging on about for so long. Go and live your life. Get out the seminar rooms, right?
Totally. And also what he said, which I think is amazing, is I overlooked it for huge amounts of time, is once you know the principles are a description of the reality, really realizing that, you automatically learn from everything, not by trying, but it's like, oh, there it is again. Oh, there it is again. There it is. And it's nothing to do with training. In a way, training belittles it, because it's, it just happens in this room from this person. But the whole idea of the training is to show you, oh, it's everywhere. It's in you. You can feel it. You can understand it. It's everywhere. You can understand it everywhere. Like sometimes I'll be in a seminar and I think I'm saying something. I say, what's a good example of that? And I'm like, well, Aaron, you should be able to see it in everything. What happened to you before you got here? And in theory, there should be 7 or 8 examples of what I'm trying to say. Before I even got to the room,
Yeah, and absolutely. I love that you say that, because I think that might be a really subtle thing, but I think there are a lot of people that also misunderstand that. And it's not about what happens in the room. And if that's what we did, both as coaches learning to coach, but also in terms of any client that we work with, whether it's a corporate client or whether it's a private individual, right? They're all human beings. And if they only got what we were talking about by being with us in the room, I find that a really, like, I wouldn't think this would be so good, right? Like, I think if the impact of the work we did was, well, when you hang around with us, you'll feel good. Then this would be at best as good as any, other, things that are out there. Because it's kind of like this, I used to call this the seminar effect, or, the intensive effect. People would go somewhere, they'd feel really good, they'd get all pumped up. You go to a Tony Robbins event and they've got the music playing and you feel all pumped up, and then you come away and it's gone. And for me, the difference I found with the principles was when I left, it kept going. It doesn't stop.
Right. That's right. It's like the principles allows you to clue in to what's running the show, and everything is it in disguise. And the idea of the training, the idea of our trainings is to wake people up to that, so they have the decode key for everything if they want it. And all we're saying here is the principles are the decode key to what's happening in your practice.
Love it.
And as a first step in that, look at the way you feel versus the way things work out. Do you follow clear thinking, or do you follow anxious analytical thinking, or whatever? Are you trying too hard? Are you inspired? Are you clear? Are you trying even though you're not clear?
Yeah.
Like the amount of people I've spoken to that want to run a successful practice but are not clear about what it is their practice is trying to do, and then they give themselves a hard time. I'm like, well, how can you powerfully do something you're not clear on?
Yeah.
How is that possible? That's normal. See? It's
the way it should be.
So simple. Yeah.
We've got a question from Bram. I'm aware of time, so we'll wrap it up.
No. Well,
soon.
we've messed people around a bit, so I'm happy to stay after school for a little while.
Cool. Bram said, could you speak about the relationship between the 3 principles and being proactive versus reactive? I see some people are trying to understand the three principles and they become even more reactive to the world because they're waiting for something to happen. And Bram, if you want to clarify that, what I hear is, and what I certainly came across, Aaron, a few years ago even, was I would come across people who would kind of listen to Sid or come across the principles, hear about, well, you just got to be in a nice feeling. It's all about the feeling. And then they would spend an awful lot of time waiting, right? And I'm going to wait until I feel good before I take action. And that never made sense to me. And I'm wondering, Bram, if you're talking about reactive to the world in that way versus just going out and doing stuff and getting feedback.
Yeah.
He's saying, yes, that's what I mean. So what's your view on that, Aaron?
Well, I love this question because it illustrates that the road to understanding is littered with misunderstanding. Me too. Like, I could write probably 20 books on all the misunderstandings I've had along the way. But if you stick to what the principles point to, you'll go through them. So, firstly, the principles point to the way the potential of mind, the potential of life works through us, and the way it gets distorted and contaminated through the fluctuations of thought, and the way we mistake that for a reality. That's what it's about, and it points to that fact about life, right? So the first thing to say is the principles doesn't have anything to say about what you should do. It doesn't have anything to say. It doesn't say you should be proactive, unactive, reactive, double active. It doesn't say anything about that. It just says that your relationship to the pure intelligence of life is mediated by thought. And don't mistake that experience for anything to do with the outside world. That's all it says. That's all it says. So the truth is, if you really follow the principles, you do whatever you want. But pay attention to the fact that the feeling you're in indicates the quality of what you're acting on and the kind of reactions and ripples and results you're likely to get. See? It should give you ultimate freedom. Now, and what this points to is, this is the training thing again. Most people think there's a three principles way. There's a three principles right and wrong. There's a three principles religion, practice. That's not true. It's to show you your freedom in life, show you your potential in life, and show you how the misunderstanding of that experience stops us from realizing our true potential and our true nature. That's it. Right? So I feel like the power of mind will be in service to whatever you want to do. If you want to be super active, you really want to be super active, and you don't listen to distracting, distorted thought, you'll be super active. If you want to be very proactive, your mind will function strategically without your effort to give you awesome ideas that are just unstoppable if you don't get distracted and derailed by distorted thought. If you want to take it easy, if you don't get distracted by distorted thought that gets you all revved up and uncomfortable, you'll just be awesome at relaxing. So that question brings up a few very common misunderstandings that are unhelpful if that's your grounding. So is that clear enough, or is there a follow-up question on that, Ankush?
Well, Bram's saying very interesting. If you have a follow-up question, please write it and we'll answer that. But yeah, I'm really enjoying this conversation, Aaron, and it certainly aligns a lot more kind of with where I'm at now, and that's why I think it's really interesting and useful for people to kind of listen into this. Just I guess a question for me while we're waiting for any comments back. But where do you see the role? And this is really a question for me. Where do you see, or what do you see the role of coaching being in the spread of the three principles out into the world?
Well, to me, the spread of the three principles in the world is in a way, a revolution of understanding in the world. And coaching is a very powerful, very widespread medium for that shift in understanding. It's not a restricted professional field. it's very accepted, it's very accessible, it's very human. It's fostering people's potential. So to me, all forms of helping and interactions are just mediums for the dissemination of a new understanding. I'm kind of fundamentalist in that way. So when I started, I was a therapist, or I was a registered counsellor, and then I did mediations, and then we worked as consultants, and I have done work as a coach, and as a teacher. And to me, it's all just medium for people, like you said, to be in service to people, their lives, their work, their world, by allowing them to get this new and enabling, empowering understanding, and to start with their view of reality starting to be in line with kind of the actual reality, so that there's less confusion and time wasting. And one thing I wanted to say before we finish, I don't know when that'll be, is if you're interested in being a 3-principle based coach or practitioner in some way, to me what that means is that grounding and your interest in understanding and seeing the principles in everything, that's the engine. That's where your professional bread is buttered. And what's beautiful about it is it's incredibly simple. It in itself is very grounding and simplifying, and it's very powerful.
Yeah, you know what I love, Aaron, and what I wanted to say and occurred to me is that, like, I'm very new to the profession of coaching, if you like. I'm very new. It's less than 5 years since I started my very first coach training. So in the kind of the realms of profession, that's quite a short time. It's not a very long time. And yet what I see is that for me, the 3 principles, I like to call it my secret weapon, right? Because I set out when I started to be a coach, I didn't actually know about the principles, or I did, but not really. I didn't sign up for any training to learn more about them. I signed up for my original training to be a coach, right? And so what I kind of stumbled on, very luckily, was 3 principles. And I find that, like it does with so many other things, the principles is really revolutionary. Like, it's revolutionary in psychology, it's revolutionary, in therapy and counseling. And I think it's equally as revolutionary in coaching.
Oh yeah.
And I think that, everyone that's tuning into this, has obviously an interest in this. That's why they're tuning into it, and they're coming through this group. That's a really, I think, a really important thing to see, because it really ties in it with everything that we've talked about, because that grounding kind of can shift, or from what I see, shave off years and years and years of professional development and also impact. Because I see sometimes now, and it's not because, I mean, you can say I'm a good coach, a bad coach. I mean, it's concepts, right? But I can see for someone of say 4 or 5 years experience, if I'd gone down the master's route, which is what I was thinking of doing, right? And gone down some executive master's route to learn about coaching, learn about all the tools and strategies and techniques, I can now have a coaching conversation with someone, really hone in on what is going to be really fundamentally going to shift them. And it's not because I've got some God-given gift for coaching, right? And it's not because I've had 20 years, 30 years, 50 years experience, but it's because of exactly what we've talked about, grounding. And so that does so much of the heavy lifting. And the great thing is, well, I think it's a great thing in a way, part of me, I don't know if you felt like this, Aaron, is like you come across this understanding and then it's like, oh my God, why does not everyone know about this? Why isn't everyone turning to this? But I would say, as professionals, what I think is a cool thing is that not everyone is, right?
Yeah.
So not everyone is. And for whatever reason, the people in this group, we've got turned on to this. We see something in it.
Yes.
And that creates opportunity, right?
Yes.
So that's also a good thing. And I know I stopped complaining about, God, why doesn't Anthony Robbins just turn over to 3Ps? Why didn't the whole Landmark Forum just go over to 3Ps? Right? Why don't all these other outside-in coaches start looking in this direction? And then I realized, well, it is what it is. And they might do as well in the future. And in the meantime, I'm just going to keep following my wisdom about and what makes sense. And I think it will be, I'm coining the phrase, an inside-out revolution within coaching, where it will get to a certain critical mass and everyone's going to be like, and the same in psychology, what's going on? All these people are getting these incredible results. That's not normal.
That's right. That's right. But I think one of the confusions for people, in contrast to the way professions normally work, is getting an appreciation of the principles, getting a grounding in it that affects you profoundly personally, is a level of understanding. And I think because it's such a simple, common sense truth, it's easy to underappreciate the power of depths of understanding. So people say, oh, I got the understanding, now I need to blah, blah, blah. Or, I got the understanding, why doesn't... And one of the things that isn't obvious that I think hasn't really fully passed from the first generation that learned from Sid down into this growing group of professionals is there are endless depths of understanding. That's where the power is. That's where the interest is. That's where the professional excellence is. So people understand the principles, they can talk about it and say, well, why aren't I the same as, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, it's all levels of understanding. It's easy to underappreciate the profundity and the importance of levels of understanding is the principle-based equivalent to professional excellence. And I think people underappreciate principle-based version of professional excellence because the whole levels of understanding is underappreciated.
I love that. My kind of go-to, and this can be very direct, is whenever a coach says, or anyone says, I get the principles, and then they start talking about something else, I'm like, well, that tells me exactly that you don't, right? Because when I, for me, it was like, well, when I'm hanging around people like Dickin and George and, all of these first generation teachers who are saying we're still learning, right?
Yes.
When Chip Chipman said a couple of years ago, I had an insight 2 weeks ago which changed my complete understanding of the principles, right? Then to me it's like, well, how can you turn around and be around this and say, oh, I get it, and here's all the things that are not working out for me in my life.
Yeah,
right.
Totally.
That doesn't make sense at all.
Totally, and I think for this really to be an inside-out revolution, and for all the people on the call to be a part of that groundswell that will become a tidal wave, we really need to get in touch with that appreciation. And it's not, I remember same thing, sitting in a room and Sydney Banks sits down with the Pransky and Associates staff and he says, last night I had an insight into the principles and now I really understand what they are and the real potential of them that I didn't understand before. And I'm sitting there thinking, is this a joke? Like, what about me? I mean, it blew my mind. It literally blew my mind. And so I do think it is a little bit new. That's one of the new things about it, that something so obvious, normal, true, simple can be so rich in depth and it's easy to overlook. And that's where all the leverage that people are looking for personally and professionally, that's where it is. It's in the depth. And that's why you have to stop being distracted by concentrating too much on all these outside details and start to look more simply kind of within yourself for a deeper level of thought, of inspiration, clarity.
Have you got time for one more quick question?
Yeah.
So again, this is me. Bram did ask, how do we improve our grounding? But I think we covered that. So my last question, and we'll finish after this, is, and it's kind of just an exploration. I've come across a couple of coaches recently who have done some training programs, and then they're looking to start building a practice. They're looking to start taking this out into the world. And someone, and I genuinely don't know who it is, someone, and it's happened a few times, has come up to them and said, you're not ready to teach this. You're not ready to take this out into the world. And interestingly for me, when I've spoken to these people, I just see them, well, they've got the understanding that they've got. And I know for me, it was really helpful at wherever I was to start sharing what I knew at that stage. That's what led to a lot of growth.
Yes.
And I also understand, I'm not advocating is, people who have a certain glimpse and all of a sudden, right, now you're going to go out and start charging thousands of pounds. But I do see that value of experience. What's your view on that? Because I know you and I've spoken about kind of having a certain level to teach.
Well, the thing is, I think it doesn't really matter Like if you know it's your understanding in play and you're interested in seeing the principles in your own limitations and struggles so that you learn from what happens to you, it doesn't really matter where you start. Because what happens in your work with people and the growth of your business is a direct reflection of the limits in your grounding. So you're getting what you need to learn thrown back in your face. And if you can see it as the principles in action, you can start anywhere and you'll learn what you need to learn. And one of the things you might learn is you're not really ready to talk to people. You might learn that. Or you're not really ready to charge for talking to people. There's a feedback system built into it because you're living the results of your understanding and you're living the and if you know that, which is why I did the foundations courses, I want people to know what that foundation is, what that grounding is, so that no matter where they start from, they learn from where they start from, so they're good to go. It's not that they're ready, it's they're ready to learn from what they do. So once that happens, it doesn't matter where you start.
Beautiful.
So that's my opinion, and I think if you don't have that orientation, then you can end up kind of wasting your time in the work that you're doing and getting frustrated, and then, well, let me try and add something else, and what if I added this, and what if I and then all of a sudden, before you know it, God knows what you're doing.
Yeah, it reminds me, I think it was Kathy that on a webinar that we did for this group, she said something like she was with George once, and like they were trying to do this training, and like the people were not taking it, and she was like, oh my God, it's falling apart, we're totally out of our depth. And she went, George, you know, like, what's going on? He's like, yeah, I know, we're totally out of depth, isn't it great? Because this is where we learn.
Yeah.
And I hear that in you. It's
right.
like, it's not whether you are out of depth or not, it's whether you're willing to learn and grow from that.
Yeah. And it comes back to what we said at the beginning, Ankush. It's like seeing the principles as a full description of what's happening gives you the ability to learn from anything. And as soon as you think there are other elements involved, you're distracting yourself from your ability to really learn and see it in action.
Right. We could carry on talking for another hour, Aaron, I think we're going to end it there.
Yes.
Thank you so much today.
Thank you.
If people want to get hold of you, what's the best way that they can do that?
The best way is to look on onethought.com, and there's an email, info@onethought.com, and they can get in touch with me through that. That's the best way of doing it.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Sorry for the several technical hiccups we've had today, but we got it working in the end. And I'll leave these up so people can watch these Facebook Lives, but I'll also edit them to be a nice little video at some point, or I'll get someone to do that.
Great.
So thanks again, Aaron. And
thank you.
Maybe one day in the future we'll have you back again if you're up for it.
Well, I really appreciate you having me for this. This is a conversation that I think is really a massive missing piece that was huge in my development, and I'm really, really grateful to be able to share it with other people that are interested. Hopefully it's useful.
Yeah, and I hope people see this as, one thing I didn't say is that, for example, with Aaron, this community is so willing to help each other out, and thank you so much for Aaron to be part of this little webinar today. And any questions as well that people might have, the group that I do is always here, so just ask, and we're all in this together. So thanks a lot, Aaron, and I'll see everyone next time.
Bye, everybody. Thanks, Ankush.